Hello and welcome to Silence, a podcast that gives women in science, technology, engineering and maths, or STEM, an opportunity to share honestly and openly about what it's really like working in these typically male-dominated subjects. Each week, one woman shares her stories and experiences. She could be a public figure, the girl next door, or someone from a far-off land. The point is she'll be deliberately kept anonymous and disguised to ensure that we're not distracted by the details of her achievements, her labels, or what she looks like. I'm Dr. Shanice O'Mara, also a woman in STEM. I studied mechanical engineering and ended up as a television broadcaster. I've worked on and reported on some cutting-edge technology and innovation over the years, and through my television work, I've met some incredible women from a diverse range of STEM fields. And you know what? I've been more amazed about what I've learned from these women when the cameras have been turned off and they're just being themselves. These women have amazingly impressive CVs, but most importantly, they're human, just like the rest of us. And it's their off-air honesty that I'd love to share with you through Silence. This week, my guest is in the field of zero-waste fashion and material development. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to share this journey.
I'm absolutely thrilled to have you on the show. Thank you for doing something that's so unusual.
Yes, it is very unusual. And actually the path to get here has also been really unusual.
Really? What was that path?
So my background is in architecture. I have a master's in architecture from Yale, and when I graduated from architecture school, I thought, like most of my peers and colleagues, that I would go straight into that profession. And so, my first job out of graduate school was in an architecture office in Los Angeles, and that was basically an interesting thing. So I came out of architecture school at a time when everybody's future was a little bit uncertain, right? It was sort of a depression. Architecture especially was one of those things that was hit really hard. So I went into my first interview with what you would call a star architect, right? So one of these big name male architects, and I sat down with him and we had the interview, and he offered me this job on the spot in the interview, and he said, okay, so we're negotiating, which I don't know, that as a woman going through school, no one really teaches you about negotiation and standing up for yourself. So I came out of like a very amazing institution with very little knowledge of how to, find my footing in this world. So I go into this interview, he offers me the job, and he offers to pay me $18 an hour. And so I'm kind of like doing the math in my head really quickly on what that is going to be and if I can actually live on it. And again, like, this is a very big name architect, so I say on the spot, yes, I'll do it. I know it's going to be long hours, so I figure out the pay. And I go into the office, and the culture in architecture offices is really long hours. And so I'm working 80 to 100 hours a week for the first month. And I get my first paycheck, and it's for 40 hours a week. So I go to the office manager and I say, well, I've worked 200 hours and I'm getting paid for 80. And she says to me, well, no, nobody here gets paid more than 40 hours a week. So that's just the baseline. You don't get overtime. You don't even get paid for the hours you worked.
Wow.
So I was really taken aback by that, right? I thought, okay, well, this is kind of BS. I'm not happy with this. So I started actually cutting back my hours really dramatically and working 40 hours a week. And that did not go over well in this office culture, where part of the culture is just unpaid work, really. So when I started working 40 hours a week, really the entire office sort of turned on me. It was very clearly not a good fit for me. And so actually I was fired from that job like within the first 3 months of working there. And that's when I started to reevaluate what path am I on, and what am I really interested in, and what do I want to be doing? What kind of work do I want to be doing? And so I started shifting pretty quickly into doing material development. I had edited an issue of the Yale Architectural Journal, and in that issue was this company that I really admired, and I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to think of my dream job, if I'm going to try and visualize that and make it happen, what is it? And I reached out to this company and said, basically, I want to work here. I want to work with you. I like what you're doing. And So that was really my first job where I really understood what I wanted to be doing and what was interesting to me.
Did you not have any kind of inklings when you were a kid about what you wanted to do?
Oh, sure. Yes, definitely. I mean, I always actually my parents would oftentimes make fun of me because we'd be driving along and I would say, stop the car, mom, like stop the car, dad. There's like a chair or a piece of metal on the side of the road that I want to pick up. So our house was always full of strange objects and sort of I would go around to like the local tile shops and look through their trash bins and get all the scraps and make things out of it. So I always knew that was always something that I loved doing. But when I got to college, actually funny enough, my first major was pre-med. I think that was sort of like a default for me. My dad was a doctor. I have some doctors in my family. So when I got to college, my default was like, okay, I'm gonna study pre-med, and it took a year before I was like, wait, I'm not. This isn't a good fit for me. I mean, I like science. Obviously, it's architecture and science kind of go hand in hand in a lot of ways. But I switched to design and architecture pretty quickly because it was really something that I was always passionate about. But then traditional architecture, I found out when I came out of architecture school is really it's a really long process. It's grueling, and a lot of the work doesn't get built. It's a hard, slow process. So for me, I wanted to really be working with my hands. I wanted to be working with materials, and when I realized that could be more than just like a hobby, that it could be an actual career, that was a pretty exciting shift for me.
And it's kind of interesting that you had to go through that torture of working 200 hours to actually get to a point where you had to ask yourself, hang on, what is it I want to do with my career?
Yes, exactly. And I think that, again, it was like a default. You come out of architecture school, there's sort of an expectation in architecture that it's a very individual pursuit, right? Like a lot of the stuff we were taught in school has to do with this idea of individual genius, right? Like you're a person and you're a genius and you work alone and you kind of like figure out everything. And then what I came to realize throughout the course of my career is that that's really not how anything works. That ideas are obviously important, but there's a whole team of people that all contribute and make something amazing.
Yeah.
I work now really collaboratively. I love collaboration and interdisciplinary collaboration too. One of the really exciting things about my job, especially working in these material technology places, is that we would work. So I was working as an architect, figuring out fabrication, and I was working the first really great job that I had. I was working next to an automotive company, and next to us was an aerospace company. So as architects and fabricators trying to figure out these complex projects, we would oftentimes walk over to the automotive shop and say like, hey guys, like how do you make a windshield? Like what's that process look like? And then we would share technology. We would actually share that technology and transfer it into architecture and architectural problem solving, and that was all really fascinating. So that process of realizing that actually what I learned in school about having to be an individual genius, like having to sort of come up with all the ideas yourself, that really isn't the way that the world works. And I think women probably understand that more inherently, that, that's part of the male dominated architecture culture too. It's like this idea of architectural genius as one person. That's the story, that's the history of architecture.
It's so interesting because I feel like you have never conformed to a conventional path. And we've only been talking for a few minutes. But it just seems so obvious to you that convention is just BS. But yet you come from quite a conventional beginning.
Yeah.
So, what was your kind of mental state going from conventional to the unconventional? I mean, was there self-doubt? Was there, huge amounts of confidence? Like, how were you through that transition?
I love that question, actually. It's really funny because there were so many times when I felt really out of place in certain situations.
Was that at school?
At school, no, but I always had a desire to do unconventional things. Like, for example, when I was in architecture school, I always wanted to push the limits of what was possible. So at one point in my schooling, I took on building this project on the roof of the building. And that was something that, I had to go to the administration and get all their approval, and everybody was like, "You're crazy, you're crazy, you're crazy." But when you pull off something like that, actually feels amazing. And then there's a lot of times that I can think of in my life where I felt almost like it's like a pride, I would say, in pushing those boundaries. Like my first job at this architectural technology company. So I know how to weld. I'm a welder, and I went in. So one of the benefits of working at a place like that is that you have all these amazing machines and the technology. And so at the same time that I was working this job, I was also building. We were also building our house, and so I was actually late at night, like in the shop, welding the doors and CNC cutting all of the cabinetry. And again, like you have access to this amazing technology when you work in a field like that. And all of the guys in the shop, all of them, like bar none, they would like come and peek around the corner, and they would be like, "What is that woman doing? Like, what's going on over there? She's like pulling metal out the back and welding things." And like, they did not understand that at all. So that, and from my perspective, I'm looking over there and I'm saying like, you know what? Like, hell yeah, this is awesome that I can do this, and I can sort of like change your perspective of what's possible. I mean, I found that particularly in fabrication and in industrial work like that, like everyone was constantly surprised that first of all, wait, you can learn how to weld? I'm like, wait, yes, welding is not complicated. You just have to learn it. It's like a skill like anything else.
What subjects did you do?
In college, I did design and architecture. So I have a minor in art history, and at the time that I was in college, it wasn't really an architecture course. It was a design course, architecturally inspired design. So art history and design.
But what about before that? I mean, did you do any of the sciences or?
I did. I mean, when I was in high school, it was basically just everything, right? I studied chemistry and physics, biology. I mean, I loved all of that stuff.
It sounds like you had a strong science streak in your family because of your father being a doctor. And so was it a case of, yeah, of course I'm going to do science subjects, but then, your love of materials and everything was almost like a secret side hobby or something?
It was. It was always a hobby, right? It was always something that my parents were like, "You're silly." Not silly, but I mean, they never discouraged me from doing it. But like when I learned how to weld and I started putting like odd metal sculptural pieces in their backyard,
Yeah.
which by the way, actually really funny. When I got home, I came home after college, so in high school I had learned how to weld and I had done like these sort of weird sculptural pieces that sat out in their lawn for a while. They were like sort of abstract lawn sculptures, I would say. And then I came home after college for a trip, and they were all gone. And I said, "Dad, what did you do with my lawn sculptures?" And he's like, "Oh, come on, It was time for those to go." They didn't appreciate the artistic nature of it. But then again, they never discouraged me from doing it, provided that I was doing well in all my other subjects, which I always was.
So what gave you the confidence to pursue something that was so unconventional?
Let's see. I mean, I think that I always cared a lot about school, so I always did well in school. I've always been a confident person. Um, I think in some way it's something that I'm born with, right? Like I practiced. I always played sports. I played team sports. I was never the best at anything, but I was always good, and I'm a good team player, and I really like being part of a team. And I think that when I went to explore new things, that people responded to that positivity, I would say. I mean, I mean, I've had a lot of hardship in life in some ways, and in other ways, I've had so much support, right? Um, like when the first job that I got outside of architecture, like I said, I went to this company, I cold called them, and I said, I knew them because of this interview process we had gone through, this magazine, the journal that I edited, but I went to them and I said, look, I really want to work here. I want to figure out this is how I can help you. I want to figure out how to make it work. And they were really receptive to that kind of confidence and positivity, and therefore they were really supportive. I always wanted to try new things. That's in my blood. I always wanted to experiment, um, and learn and learn new things and learn how to actually put things together myself. I don't like, it's funny. My father is very he's not a good teacher, I guess I would say. So he would try to teach me how to do something, and then he would just do it himself, right? So I think in opposition to that, I was really like, I gotta learn how to do these things myself. Otherwise, someone else is always gonna do them for me.
That's interesting that you felt that,
Yeah,
because some people are like, oh, well, things are being done for me, so why would I need to learn it?
yeah,
You took the
I can
opposite
see that.
track.
I was always in opposition to my father.
You mentioned that you have had a lot of support. Where was that support coming from?
Well, I think that that's from teachers and from employers, and from colleagues. I think that in general, having a positive attitude and being willing to experiment, that my experience has been that people are mostly supportive of that. I've had employers like the first summer that I was out here in LA, I went out and got a job in a welding shop, and my main driver for that was like, hey, I can help you with your projects during the day. Again, if you let me use your shop at night. So it was like it's always been. I've always had these sort of reciprocal relationships that I cultivate because I like that kind of relationship. So I've always found those people really supportive, and helpful when you present stuff in the right way. I
Mm.
mean, I feel like people in general want to, they want to work collaboratively and they want to do creative things, at least in my field. Um, but at the same
Yeah.
time, in architecture, when I started in that field, I realized very quickly that it was the opposite. I felt like in that first architecture job, I felt really small and not helpful. I felt like that was it. I felt like I was wasting my time, and no one was really interested in hearing my ideas. And I think that very quickly is why I was like, wait, I need to get out of this.
Yeah, it sounds as though you have a lot of confidence in yourself. And so, when you're willing to be of service to other people, it's because you have confidence that you can provide something useful for others.
Yes, I hope so, and I would hope that I would hope that all people feel like that. I very much try to instill that in my children and say, like, you know what, you guys, everybody has amazing knowledge to share.
Yeah, I find that very inspiring. Because I think sometimes some people might be starting with a certain level of self doubt. If we're particularly women in STEM subjects, sometimes we get quite self conscious that we may not be as good in those kinds of subjects as maybe our male counterparts. So, for example, with you welding, have you ever felt conscious of being female in quite a male dominated area?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and in fact, that's something that I get frustrated with myself often, actually, because I do acquiesce to the men around me, right? Like in that welding shop, there was a time in my life, I try very hard not to do this anymore, but there was definitely a time in my life when I would play dumb and on construction sites all the time. Like, oh wait, how do you detail this door? How do these two things go together? And then whatever contractor or welder or fabricator, they feel like I found. So actually, before I'll step back a second. Before I went back to graduate school, I worked for 2 years for an architect in San Francisco, And in that job capacity, so I didn't have a graduate degree. I was just getting into architecture, and just like trying to see even if I liked it. And I was oftentimes on construction sites, and that was a horrible experience for the most part because most of those foremen they're pretty sexist, right? It's like you go into the office to have a meeting with someone about the project you're working on, and there's a calendar on the wall, and it has a 75% naked woman laying back on a motorcycle, or an actual naked woman, and you're kind of like sitting in these meetings in really uncomfortable situations. And in those situations, I found, even though I didn't like this, and I didn't really recognize the feeling at the time, but I found very much that I would acquiesce to those men because there's like a lack of respect, right? And also I was young at that time, so it's the combination of both of those things. But so oftentimes in those situations, it would be like, wait, what do you think is the right thing? So I would, it took me a long time to actually express expertise, I guess I would say that, and there is an expertise that comes with age, but a lot of times, in fabrication, and this is a really male-dominated industry, architecture and materials and industrial fabrication, that there was a lot of moments when instead of saying what I knew to be right, I would say, well, what do you think is right?
Yeah.
And that comes, I think that's something that honestly I learned as a woman or as a girl growing up. It's like you have to voice your opinion in a very particular way so that you come across in a way that people want to help. And there's different. I've had different experiences with that, but many of my experiences have been sort of like shaded by that sexism for sure.
I mean, for some women, that actually holds them back, or they even drop out. But you managed to overcome that potential chipping away at your self-esteem for being a woman. What would you say were the main things that help you pull through that?
Well, I think I would say that the first thing is that I really identified where I wanted to be working and what I wanted to be doing. So having that focus, and then there was a balance between things that I know that I can speak knowledgeably on and things that I have to learn. So the people that were around me then, like the team I was working with, then I was able to develop this relationship where I was an expert in some things and they were expert in some things, and we were sharing knowledge in a way that was very productive. So once I sort of identified the kind of company I wanted to work at and the kind of job that I wanted to be doing, and that really had a lot to do with what I was actually good at, then I got really confident in terms of managing projects and suggesting solutions and suggesting different courses of action. And then we would test things out. Like those days were really collaborative and they were really experimental in terms of what worked and what didn't work. And that's because we were working on projects that were really new. We were developing new materials and new fabrication technology, and that stuff was really collaborative, and that helped me grow a lot in terms of finding my voice. And it was a small team of people, and I think that helps too. There was 5 of us really that were working together closely at that point.
So it was a case of having a real passion for something, like a genuine interest in something and following it.
Yeah, exactly. And recognizing and not settling. Like my first job out of graduate school in architecture, I really settled for the first thing that came my way instead of being thoughtful and identifying what I wanted to do and really going after it and being a little more patient and finding that thing.
It's kind of a great lesson for life, really, because it's not just about career, but it's also about other things maybe that are more personal, really knowing what it is you want and then going for it.
Yeah. And that stuff is not easy. I mean, it certainly takes a little time. I wish that I had been taught that in school. I wish someone had sat me down and been like, this is how you negotiate and let's practice it. Like when I have students now that are actually going out to apply for jobs, I will oftentimes like call them into my office and be like, let's sit down for an hour and practice. Like, let's just practice. Because we're going to practice interviewing, we're going to practice negotiating, we're going to practice asking questions, and that stuff is just, it goes such a long way in towards success.
Mm.
I think, and again, that gets back to this idea of like individual genius. I think I was taught in school that you're just supposed to be awesome at this stuff. Like it's supposed to come easy. But you just gotta work at it. You gotta practice it.
Yeah, I just feel like your confidence basically just smashed through any kind of discrimination that you may have faced. I mean, it may have not felt like that at the time, but I think your confidence kind of won in the end.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that. I hope that it did. Like even on these construction sites with the foreman, I always was like, I mean, I never really got angry. I would sometimes get angry personally. I always tried to be a good team player and be confident in front of them. I just felt like, I don't know, again, maybe this was something I learned, but I felt like that was a better way to go. Now, as I get older, I'm a little angrier about sexism in general, and I'm a little quicker to voice my opinion now that I'm older.
Mm.
But that also feels okay. Like I feel more confident now than I did when I was younger. But you're right. I always did. I always went in strong. I guess I would say I always tried to go
Yeah.
in like powerfully into those situations so that I I mean that feeling of feeling weak or trampled on, that's not a good feeling.
Yeah, but it doesn't sound like you ever, even if you felt it, it doesn't sound like you ever showed it.
I tried not to. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I did.
Yeah. Kind of quietly being, quietly calculating your response so as not to come across as weak.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh, it's so
Yeah.
complicated to be a woman, isn't it?
I think so. I mean, what does make you angry today in terms of sexism? Because within your career field, what are the issues that are faced by women today?
Well, I now have sort of I've separated myself a little bit from those issues. So now I have my own company and I'm able to sort of dictate how the office culture is. Um,
Hmm.
it's very equal and very collaborative, and everybody has a voice. But I think in general in architecture, it's the same stuff that I faced when I was coming out of school, which is like there's just a lot of sexism in general. I mean, the stuff that makes me really angry today, I think, is this like I still oftentimes get talked down to, even though I'm definitely an expert in my field at this point. Um, and that is really frustrating. I mean, I think in the world in general, I'm passionately committed to this whole movement, this whole movement of expression of sexual assault and sexism, and trying to make that visible and vocal about it so that people can understand it. That's stuff that I work on a weekly basis, just social justice outside of business in general. And I have two daughters, and I'm raising them in the same way. Those numbers are all really horrifying. So I hope that they can grow up. But I see my daughter actually. She's 9, and I already see it from the media that she watches. I already see her like apologizing for her actions in a way, and that's something I do too. Like oftentimes I'll be like, I'm sorry I did that. I catch myself saying sorry all the time. I'm like, oh gosh, like stop apologizing for just being a human being. Um, so I catch her doing that too, and that stuff really upsets me. And I think again that's cultural. In in architecture, I think it's the same. It's the same in a lot of other industries where the time pressure is so intense, and the culture of the profession is so intense that women don't really have a lot of space to have families, to have to have both. It's like I still see it's very much about making a choice, right? You have to choose, like, am I going to devote myself to my career? And you know what? Even in my own career, so I've pivoted a few times, but one of those pivots that I had to make was because I had kids. So I got pregnant I got pregnant at 30 by surprise, which was awesome. That's a great way to get pregnant, by the way, just by surprise. So I was pregnant by surprise, but at the time I was working for a company. I was traveling weekly or bi-weekly working for this company in Utah and traveling back and forth. So the demands of my schedule were really intense. So when I got pregnant, I had to really scale that back. And that dramatically shifted my job. So my job shifted from really interesting architectural projects, really interesting material development and experimentation, and working with this great team of people, to being very isolated and working on my computer, because the company that I worked for didn't have the flexibility for me to have a baby and also be a part of this team. So at that point in my career, my job shifted again from being really interesting to being very much about like cost analysis and cost estimates. And that did give me a certain amount of flexibility in terms of raising kids, but it changed my career dramatically. So at that moment, I really did have to make a choice between, do I want to have a family or do I want to continue on this very intense and time consuming path to 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 be really successful and pull off some of these big projects that I want to do. And I really didn't have a good choice. It wasn't like I could measure these two things equally and make an educated decision between them. My choice was really dictated by really the state of my body, and that I wasn't able to travel, and therefore my job shifted. So rather than the company accommodating my needs and allowing me to grow as my family grew, it was definitely a step backwards for me, which, ultimately, like I said, I pivoted and now I have a company that's totally separate from that, but I had to make a giant pivot because I had a family. And I think that happens to a lot of women in architecture. It's like the demands are so intense, the time demands are so intense, and there's not a sort of understanding or accommodation for the desire to have a family. And that is really depressing because it doesn't really have to be either or. Like I have now at my company now. So I now have a 2-year-old daughter, and at my company now we have a nursery. She comes into work. We have a nanny, and anyone at the studio that has a baby is welcome to bring their children in. It's like it can be part of the company culture, and it's really lovely to work like this, actually.
It sounds like it's part of the culture of the future as
Yes.
female.
Yes, like this much more holistic view of working and innovating, but also being around your family and your children. It's like that is absolutely possible, but it's not at all part of architectural culture. It's like very much frowned upon still. You can't bring your kids to work. Who can bring their kids to work? Like, and then how do you have
Mm.
kids if you don't have flexibility to sort of like absorb them into whatever speed bumps you hit along the way?
When you first found out you were pregnant and it was a surprise, did you ever think that you would be in the position you're in today, where you're running your own company, your employees are bringing their kids
No,
into work? Did you ever think that would be even
no,
possible?
I still am like pinching myself. I can't believe I'm doing this. Yeah, no, I definitely did not have this vision at that time.
So, I mean, you're pioneering in that sense. I mean, how how has it been possible to achieve this?
Well, so that's an interesting question, and it's still, I will speak like totally honestly, it's still tenuous. Like I'm not certain that it's going to work yet. There's a lot of uncertainty in starting a business, and I'm still trying to figure all of that out, in all honesty. So it's like, but I did decide. So I decided before before I was pregnant with my third child. I decided my grandfather had died. I got $30,000 from his passing, and I decided, okay, I'm gonna start this company. I have this idea. I want to do it. It's gonna be amazing. And so I took that money and we started, um, and really like sort of bootstrapped along the way. And then I was pregnant again, also kind of by surprise. And at that moment, it was the kind of thing where I was like, wait, I've just started this business. I'm a year into it. I definitely don't want to give it up. It's it's really amazing. There's a lot of potential. So how do we do this? And at the time, I had a business partner, and she also was pregnant, actually. So together we were like, okay, we want to keep doing this. How do we do it? And really, it was a matter of having our family support.
Mm.
Really, like my husband has been very supportive. Her husband was really supportive. So we were able to, without them, we would not have been able to continue. So we were able to get through that year of being pregnant and having a baby because of the support of our families. And now we're at the point where, you know, we're the business is actually breaking even and we're starting to have profit, and that's a shift. Um, but those beginning years were not easy, and if we didn't have financial support from our families, we would not have been able to do this.
And so, with all of that said, it sounds like you really are a woman that has it all. Do you think that's true? And what do you think the keys are to having it all?
I mean, I kind of love that, and I kind of hate it, right? Because it's really loaded. I do have it all. I honestly, and I look around in the morning when I wake up, and I'm like, wow, this is incredible. You know, I have like kids climbing all over me, and there's a lot of joy, and I am very lucky to be able to do what I love for sure. Um, and what are the keys to that? What are the keys to having it all? Oh my gosh. I guess I would say I have a lot of help. So while I do run this company, I and our household, I have a lot of help. I think there is a level of confidence that I am blessed with that uh, that's very helpful in just sort of forging forward. My personality is not very introspective. I know that that's you know, a lot of people look inward, and that's amazing. And I applaud you if you can do like deep self analysis. But I don't do that. I don't ever do that. So I'm really like, as my personality is very outward facing. I'm looking out into the world a lot, and I am confident, and I feel like I can do good.
That's so interesting. This that you talk about inward and outward facing perspectives. Um, what do you mean by that, and why do you think they're advantageous or not?
Well, I think so. I have I've always found it's funny because I've gone through some personal trauma in the last year that has forced me to kind of look inward more than I am typically comfortable with. Like be way outside of my comfort zone in terms of I have actually gone to therapy for the first time in my life, which has been a very uncomfortable thing for me. But it just takes up a lot of energy. It's really consuming, right? Like when you're looking in on yourself, and so you have to feed it and you have to sort of like talk to yourself and analyze it, and it just takes a lot of energy. So for me personally, I don't hold on to things. I don't hold grudges. For the most part, really, things sort of slide off my back and I can let them go. And I find that really, really helpful in my life. And then what I try and do is really look outward into the world for inspiration. So I I feel confident that I'm a good person, and I don't need to spend, or I don't. It's not that I don't need to. I don't want to spend a lot of time being introspective because I find that for me personally, it just is exhausting, and it takes up too much of my energy,
Mm.
and it makes me I don't know. It makes me self-centered, right? As opposed to what I want to be, which is which is looking outward and connecting with people and finding confluences and finding ways to collaborate and finding inspiration in other people. I find that to be much more productive for me in my life in general, in terms of finding joy and being happy.
That's amazing.
And I don't think it's like that. I know it's really easy to say. It's really easy to say all these things. It's much easier to say it than it is to practice it. But in general, when I find myself being really introspective, I get sad. Um, not because I find things that I don't like, just because it takes a lot of time and energy, and I find it really consuming.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you absorb all the good things in the world and you don't want to dwell on any of the negative things. Um, and also, you don't take
And
any of the negative things that do exist personally. I mean, that seems like how you've approached the world.
this has been a particularly difficult year for that, I have to say. There is a lot of negativity in the world right now.
Mm,
Um, this has been a really tough year for that, actually, living in America in this time.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I try really hard to find, my perspective to be one of joy and thankfulness. Like I have, like you said, I really do have, and I built this thing that I'm very proud of, and that is, that's working. That's surprising me a little bit that it's working. Uh, but it's the more attention and more love that I can devote to this business and to my family, the better I feel. And that's and then again with the negativity in the world, that stuff is actionable. And when I can meet people, like we have this amazing community here of activists that it's incredible to spend time with those people. So the when I can take action on the stuff that's upsetting me, I that also makes me feel better.
Mm,
That's like environmental issues and even stuff as simple as writing postcards to the EPA or writing postcards to my senator, or we do that with our kids, or going to do beach cleanup and stuff. Like we'll do that stuff, not all the time, but occasionally. And that way of being in the world I also find really inspiring.
yeah. What's driving you?
Ooh, that's a good question. That's something I struggle with a little bit, actually. There's definitely days when I have to figure that out, especially because I'm in this big transition. There's success. I'm driven by success, right? And how you measure that is different for everybody. But for me, I would measure that by having a measurable impact on the world. That's what I want to do. So that's something that I'm pushing really hard for, and working really hard for it. I would say that that is my biggest driver right now. And then also I want to inspire my kids. Like the idea of that they could see a woman, a successful woman business owner who sort of doing things the way she wants to. I hope that this works because I would really like to set that example for my children.
Why do you think girls are not going into technology?
Well, I think that there's a lot of cultural reasons for that, right? It's like I see that in my daughters from the get go. You go into the toy store and it's really horrifying, actually, the way that things are marketed to girls and boys. Um, you walk in and this is stuff that you've heard before, I'm sure, but you walk into any toy store and all the girl things are kitchens and dolls, and all the boy things are cars and science kits, and like all the t-shirts, all the girls t-shirts have unicorns on them, and all the boys t-shirts have astronauts on them.
It didn't seem to have stopped you from learning how to weld.
Funny enough, I think when I was a kid, it wasn't so pronounced as this. Like I mean, I definitely had Barbies, and I also had like Star Wars figures, growing up, and I also had cars, and I also played in the mud. But I think it's more pronounced now than it was when I was a kid. And no, I never. I think maybe my parents were really good at just saying like, there's no limits, and there's no limits to what you can do. I always felt that. And I definitely try to impart that to my kids too, but it's very difficult right now when the marketing is so strong, and all of the media that they take in right now is so gendered. It's really, really scary. And I don't know if that's, there are these strong messages of girl power too. I hope that that can counteract this very strong media, the very strong media. I definitely find that stuff terrifying. So and it's funny because it's not just so we've been talking for a while, and you got to get a sense of my personality. And I definitely try to push my daughter into alternative everything, right? Like whatever is on the boys' side, that's what you should be buying, right? Or like, and her perspective on this is that she's taken in all of this media and she's uncomfortable going to the boys' side. Like she doesn't want to do that. She says, "No, I can't buy that." I'm like, "Wait, why?" Like she's falling into these kind of stereotypes just because of the way that she's been marketed to in the media, which is again, it's terrifying. I find that really scary.
Yeah, I mean, with your daughters in mind, or any other kind of little girls who are right at the start of choosing subjects at school and building a sense of identity, what key messages would you give them?
Yeah, I think that is immensely important to craft those messages. And I think what I would say is that, well, for one thing, they can do anything, that anything is possible for real. I try really hard myself to talk to girls as, just the same as anyone, right? Like, asking them what they're thinking and what are you feeling about this and validating their feelings and their emotions. I think that what I see is that girls, just like I feel actually, they have a tendency to apologize for their opinions. So it's a matter of just saying your opinion is valid and I want to hear your thoughts. Your brain is amazing. I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear what's in your head. Um, and you're creative and you're interesting and you can do anything you want. Like the world right now is incredible in that way. And there really is a lot of opportunity and I hope that there's not as much exclusion. I mean, this whole movement that's happening right now, I am floored by the women that are coming out and speaking up and saying, this is why I didn't report sexual assault because it's so pervasive culturally. So this level of expression is really moving me, and I hope it continues. I think it's really powerful.
It is very interesting times, because I feel we're in a transition where women are fed up of not having a voice,
Oh, for sure.
and men may be getting fed up with not being able to express their sensitivity.
Yes, I hope so. I hope so. That is definitely something that I teach my son and that I talk to all his friends about. It's like there is no weakness in being sensitive. There is no weakness in that at all. That is powerful too. I mean, those are amazing lessons. And yeah, this whole movement where women are speaking up, like I never had a voice. I could never speak up about any kind of assault or, um, even just discrimination. That wasn't something that was possible when I was growing up. It just wasn't listened to. There was no forum for that. There was no one who cared. It was right, like you were assaulted in a hotel or whatever. I mean, wherever. And I had one experience where I was really badly physically assaulted in an elevator, and I had no one to tell. Like there wasn't anyone who would listen. The police didn't care. It was like the kind of thing where you just didn't feel like you had an outlet for it. And now, if you can, and people will listen and not judge you, that is like an incredible shift. I was constantly judged for how I looked in architecture. The way I dressed and the way I looked. And I was never provocative, but I'm like tall and thin and I wore skirts and when I would go, I mean, whatever, when I would go out, I would dress sexy. Like I was always judged for that. And that was always a good thing, right? It was to my benefit too. So it's both. It's complicated, all that stuff, but
It is very complicated, and what seems to be coming out very strongly from talking to you is that it never influenced you. Like you mentioned earlier, water off a duck's back, like it never stuck. And I just think, out of everything that I've heard from you, that seems to have been the consistently most powerful tool that you have, which is that it never ever stuck.
Yeah, that's true. That's really true, and I really appreciate you saying that. And it didn't. I was able to sort of dismiss those traumas and not carry them with me.
You are an unusual find in the sense that you haven't hung on to any negativity. You've just grown from it. I mean, that's incredible.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Like in retrospect, looking back on my life, I didn't I wouldn't even say I worked hard to let go of that stuff. I just did.
Do you have any idea why? I mean, what may have taught you or who might have inspired you to do that?
Well, I think it's partially innate, right? Like I said before, my personality is not introspective.
Mm,
I didn't ever think about or care about what other people thought of me, I think I would say.
yeah.
I never even I would even take it a step further. Like I never even realized. I'll give you an example. You know, sometimes things just stick in your head.
Yeah.
Like so when I was
Round and round and
in
round.
middle school, rounds and rounds. So when I was in middle school, I was at this middle school dance, and I was dancing, right? And I whatever have my own style of dancing as everyone does. And then like a number of years later, I realized that there was this boy at the dance that was totally making fun of me and my like way of dancing, which whatever, you know, I didn't learn how to dance till later in life, but who cares? Anyway, so I realized much later on that this boy was actually like making fun of my dancing, and so I would say that I was like really oblivious to that in a way that really serves me well in retrospect.
Mm,
But I was kind of oblivious to other people's opinions of me. In and I think
that's
that, like I said, I think
awesome.
that that really served me well in a way that I didn't even understand. I didn't understand that growing up, but I was never caught up in I don't know, like popularity or. And I had friends across the board in all social circles, which I think actually maybe that's it. Is like having a lot of different kinds of people around you, and that helped me to not care as much about any one person, like what any one person thought.
I think that's it right there. I feel like
Yeah, that's interesting.
that's it. We've
Yeah,
found the key, which is that in everything I've heard from you, the most fundamental characteristic that has served you to get where you are today, which is a very successful place where you, at least on the surface, appear to have it all, is that the one thing that really helped was not caring what people
yeah,
think and not taking things personally and being oblivious to societal expectation and past events and just forging on
yeah.
with what it is you want to do and having a very clear idea about that.
I love it. I feel like it's an epiphany for me too, to like have clarity on that. And that
It's
comes,
amazing.
yeah, and that comes a lot from. I do think it comes from interacting with and trying to understand a lot of different kinds of people.
You've absorbed a lot of inspiration from people outside of you, but it's all been morsels of information to really support the identity that you have wanted to create for yourself.
Yes.
And what's different about the way you've done that compared to the majority of people is that you haven't lost your sense of self in all of that influence. You've just reaffirmed who it is you want to be as an individual. And that has just blown my mind because, I've met you. I was from the moment I heard you speak, I was inspired by your
Thank you.
clarity of self. And
You're very kind.
yeah, just hearing your story has really supported that. I don't even think you've been aware of that characteristic in you, but it's really clear to me that you know you, you've you've just stayed very true to yourself.
Thank you. I do feel that now, coming out of this whole, like when you looking back and saying, okay, this is the path that you're on. I am at a transition point right now again where I have to sort of figure out what direction I'm going, which now that we've had this conversation actually feels a little bit more exciting.
Yeah, I feel the same way because, I'm
a little bit better equipped to make these decisions right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so big on meditation and checking in with oneself and getting quiet, and really kind of just making sure that you're on your own path. But listening to you, I think you've just naturally done that, and it's inspiring because your life really is the result of having done that, whether you've been aware of it or not. And for that, I really thank you for coming on this show.
Thank you so much. This has been extremely enjoyable. I really appreciate it. And it's hard, like I don't often get to express myself like this. It feels pretty amazing, actually.
Well, I think you've inspired others by sharing your experiences. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, what an incredible conversation. I literally feel like both of us have just had an epiphany. Once again, just totally inspired, but inspired in a way where I just feel it's so important to check in with oneself and to really ask yourself often, what is it that I'm trying to do? What is my purpose in life? And just staying true to that, because we are often bombarded with outside influences and external stimulation, and that can be a real source of inspiration, but it should never ever lead you off your own path. Our guest today was certainly a fine example of that. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to Silence, and catch you next week.